Good day, Braves country. It's Coach Ken Anderson, coming from Hardcore Braves. We got a special Coach's Corner interview with Jesus Cano from the Athletics. First of all, today, how you doing, Jesus?
Oh, I'm doing really great. Not with the team in Baltimore right now. Just wanted to go out and check out some of the affiliates this week, and hopefully that can happen. But I'm stoked to be here. It was nice meeting you, Coach, in person a few weeks ago, and wanted to be on the show, and I will gladly be on here. As mentioned, you guys need me. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it. And Aaron likes to jump in here. Aaron's my right hand person when it comes to these interviews. Aaron's trying to get into the business. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing good. Feeling pretty good. Happy it's Friday.
We're all happy it's Friday. So Braves are taking off to play the Orioles. Ryan, we have boots on the ground there. Ryan's going to try to get a lot of stuff up there in Baltimore. So he'll be there and we'll have a lot of stuff. So, hey, Sue, before we get into this, a lot of our fan base, you're very much new to our fan base. And the fact that with Chad and Gabe and all them, they kind of come through the Atlanta market. So this is a little different for you. So you want to kind of give everybody a little background. I know that you went to Fresno and you worked for Baseball America and San Jose Mercury News, but you want to give somebody some background on how you got to Atlanta and the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, no, it's been quite the journey. I was actually on the phone with a friend yesterday and just talking about how 2 months ago my life looked completely different. 3 months ago, I don't think I would have been here at all. So, yeah, I mean, I'm 26 now, but I started off writing about high school sports when I was 15 years old. I mean, that's something that, at a young age, I identified that I really wanted to do. So, I did that for a couple of local outlets in my area, just freelancing and stuff like that. Anybody who gave a 15-year-old kid, a chance, I would go out and do. And so I progressed my way up. When I went to community college at Los Banos College in my hometown, was the sports editor there. Then when I transferred to Fresno State, I became the sports editor and the managing editor there. And during my time at Fresno State, that's when I got the job at the San Jose Mercury News. It was like a part-time job, like maybe like below an intern level job, just helping out with the print production side and occasional reporting. Like during the summer, I got to cover the then Oakland A's, which were my favorite team growing up. So it was nice to cover a few games at the Coliseum before ultimately they moved away. And then I was doing that for part time for about a year and then working different jobs and stuff like that before MLB.com opened their first content diversity fellowship. And I was part of the first class and was assigned to work in Arizona. So that's how I ended up in Arizona. And I was doing all type of coverage. I was filling in. I was covering the Arizona Fall League, the MLB draft, just a bunch of different types of coverage. So I did that for 2 years, and then I finally got my first full time job at Baseball America, covering prospects down in Arizona. So which was great. I really enjoyed my time in Arizona. So it was nice to stay there for a little bit longer, and basically did everything. I was there year round, spring training. Uh, Complex League, Bridge League, which I think this is like one of the few times I'm kicking myself about not being at the complexes because all the draftees are there, and that's probably one of the most exciting times in that calendar year. But Fall League, Instructional League, everything like whether it was 75 degrees and cloudy or 115 degrees and very very hot, I was back there covering those guys, so it was great. And then the opportunity with baseball, not with Baseball America, with the Athletic came about earlier this year. Applied for the job. I had a couple of conversations with people in the past about openings, and I mean, they thought I was best fit for the job. And here I'm in Atlanta now. Packed everything I did into my apartment in Phoenix, including my cat. Brought it over, and this is it. So covering Major League Baseball has been a dream of mine since I was 15 years old, and I'm very fortunate with a really good group of people to put me in position to be here. And I hope everything that I learned throughout my career to use it to give Braves country the best coverage possible.
Good deal. Aaron, what you got for him this morning?
Well, I wanted to ask you, obviously you've covered baseball before, but you're new to the Braves. So what would you say is the biggest surprise that you've had since working with the organization and covering the Braves so far?
Well, I think for me, like we got to understand that I grew up in California. I didn't have TBS, and there really wasn't a lot of eyes for me locally to be able to watch a lot of the East Coast teams unless they were playing the A's or the Giants. So I really did not know how big Braves country ran. I like it's insane. Like when I was moving from Phoenix and I had to drive through different parts of the South, like Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, like it was it was pretty fascinating to see so many different Braves, homes with a bunch of Braves flags or people with Braves, decals on the back of their car. And like I was like, whoa, this is where it really runs deep. And then just to learn more about the impact that TBS had and the following they have, everywhere. Like the only road city that I've been in, I joined the team in Los Angeles against the Dodgers. That's the only city so far where there hadn't been as big as a Braves presence. But like everywhere I've gone, San Diego, Pittsburgh, Chicago. Everywhere I go, there's so much. What's it called? There's so much of a following. There's so much fan bases that travel. When I'm on the plane to catch these, there's a lot of Braves fans in there, and I think that's really impressive, and that really motivates me to provide a lot of coverage. I think there's a lot of people fortunate here that live close enough to Truist Park that could come watch it play, but I can only imagine what it's like for people who are in different sections of the South or just in different parts of the country because they grew up as fans for TBS that just can't come to games as much. And I understand the value that it comes to having my access and turning it into insight. And I think that's really motivated me to, go above and beyond for my work. So I think on that point, I think it's what's really impressed me the most.
Yeah, and you're going to miss a treat a little bit, but I'm sure you'll make it to the Nationals. The Braves have a huge fan base up in the North Carolina, Virginia area because it took a long time for the Nationals. So there'll be a lot of Braves fans at Camden Yards. They'll pack it. So I'm going to ask you about because I know Dave. Dave was a legend around here. Dave O'Brien wrote for the Athletic. He finally retired. He was famous for his cat too. So Jesus, so if you ever want the cat to come on screen, that'd be fine too. So did what's it like taking over for somebody? Has it been a smooth transition for you? And I know Dave's really in the retirement world, but has he done anything? You've talked to him at all?
Yeah, he's in retirement world, and I think his Twitter account might be in retirement world too. Yeah, don't click on that link, guys.
Yeah.
But I actually haven't had the chance to talk to Dave. Like it all came so fast recently. So maybe I should reach out to him. But I mean, I've seen the effects of it. I think me and Dave are two completely different persons. I'm much taller. I'm Latino. I mean, I'm much younger. So we're two completely different people with two completely different personalities. From I heard with different people the beat and different people the organization. I think in studying Dave's work before I got here, I think he every night he wanted to unload the whole story and write as much as his thoughts and stuff like that when it came to the Braves. I think my style is a little bit different, and I've seen some of the readers in the comment section at the Athletic kind of call me out for not writing every single day and not writing off the game, which you can read game day, you can watch highlights on Twitter. I don't need to tell you what happened in the game, but what I can tell you is how this impacts the Braves season as a whole. For example, like this past week, like this morning, I wrote a story on the Jim Jarvis and the opportunity he sees, but now that creates quite the conundrum. For the Braves in terms of their roster crunch and stuff like that too. A lot of the stories that I've written, are more long-term storytelling. There was two stories that I can point out this past year that took a long time in terms of reporting, and that's the stories where I talked to both Ha-Sung Kim and Austin Riley about the struggles that they were going through. That's not stuff that you just write off a game. That's especially for somebody like me that's coming fresh on the beat. That's stuff that happens with building trust with the players, seeing a big sample size, talking to different people and stuff like that. And I feel like stories like that really, matter a little bit more than what's happening in a game on a daily basis because it paints the picture as to why these struggles are happening, giving the opportunity to the players to tell their side of the story because that's what I'm always going to do, and also talk to different coaches to talk about and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing between me and DOB. I know it's going to take a lot for the at least the people who subscribe to the Athletic and read my stories, which I appreciate so much, to get adjusted to. But I think the other thing too that makes me stand out compared to maybe not just him, but just a lot of different other reporters is the fact that I can speak Spanish and like all of my conversations are naturally in Spanish, and when I was covering high school sports, college sports, coming up in my career, it's something that I didn't use as much. And now, the moment I started covering Major League Baseball, I just saw how much of a difference maker it is. These guys just trust you more. They also respect you a little bit more to begin with. Not that they don't respect anybody, but like they see somebody of color, somebody who speaks Spanish that isn't in their space as often. I think that's something that gains their trust as much, and it just becomes a lot more natural. When every interview that I have, with Didier Fuentes, Raisel Iglesias, Jorge Mateo, all these different guys that speak Spanish. Jorge speaks a little bit of English, but to be able to do it naturally, I think it just allows him to just have that organic conversation, that organic trust, and Franco Garcia, the interpreter, good guy and does a really good job at translating. I will say that, but it's different talking directly with the guy, seeing him every day and having these conversations to build up. So I think to answer your question, I would say that's the biggest difference between me and DOB.
You're also a lot better looking than Dave. I can tell you right now. Aaron, what you got?
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you about the Spanish aspect because you are able to interview players in English and Spanish. So, do you feel like it gives you an advantage? And like you said, they have a trust with you. So, do you think that you get a better perspective from them since they're able to talk to you in their native language compared to like going through a translator?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's been the case for a very long time. I think growing up, for me specifically, like my parents didn't speak English growing up, so I was always the middleman in between, whether it was like ordering stuff at a restaurant or like translating, you know, these government documents that 80-year-old me did not know what it was, but I just had to translate it and go ahead and do it. I feel like that's a bridge that I've always been able to do throughout my entire life, right? So and I definitely see the way it translates in baseball. Like, for example, when I was covering the Arizona Complex League. A lot of these kids that come in, for one, they're not very highly rated prospects, but they're still prospects. But a lot of them are 17, 18, 19 years old, and they're coming over to the United States for the first time. And that statement itself, maybe paints a picture. But when you go from like the Dominican Republic, Venezuela to over here, where it's a lot more advanced, I mean, that's such a big culture shock. Like a lot of these guys don't know how to go grocery shopping or how to use a dishwasher or how to order an Uber. That stuff to them, that's foreign. So I definitely saw it then and there and build that trust. And I became a guy that they could talk to about stuff. And the way I see it in the clubhouse too is you don't see, I think there's only three other beat reporters in the league, from different outlets that speak fluent Spanish. And I take a lot of pride in being able to do that, especially at the Braves because they have a big, Spanish speaking presence from a lot of the players and let's daily conversations because when we go to the clubhouse for an hour, you could either do one or two things. You could either just stand there and hope and just waste your time, or you could go around, talk to people, and be able to build insight. And because of the ability to speak Spanish, I'm able to do that to different people. Like I know that the language comes into play, but I don't see a lot of people having casual conversations with Didier Fuentes, Raisel Iglesias, Robert Suarez, Ronaldo Lopez. Like the other day, like I got to understand the story of why Ronaldo Lopez uses the Halloween theme as his walk-up song. And that
Oh.
just came up in casual conversation, which is going to be a story. I'm writing a story about the players' walk-up song, which is why I didn't reveal the reason because of it. So, but it's stuff like that that just comes important because they aren't accustomed to that throughout different teams and stuff like that that they played in. So I think it's really helped me quite a lot, and I think it's also allowed my storytelling to become better because I've been able to get more direct quotes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's also great to have some different. As a Braves fan, I want to hear different perspectives. I get the everyday, but I want to hear the natural stuff, like the walk up songs, things like that are fabulous. So, one of the things that we talked about at the stadium that I had forgotten, and you brought it up, is when you got to the Braves, one of the Braves players, Dylan Lee. Fresno State Bulldog, and Dylan's a fellow Tennessean. He lives up here in Cleveland, near me. So, what was it like? Did Dylan kind of help you with, not just I know even the Hispanic players, but the non-Hispanic players like the Austin Rileys and all them he's friends with. Did he help them kind of contact them and make it easier for you?
Yeah, so he was one of the first guys I wanted to talk to. And actually, like, it's crazy because when I was in college in one of my journalism classes, like, it wasn't even a sports writing class, but I remember the Braves were in the World Series. It was 2021, and Dylan Lee was on the team. And our warm up was to write a lead, which is the first sentences of basically your intro paragraph about what if you were writing a story about Dylan Lee in the World Series, what would it be? And I didn't come up with this, but there was a I forget her name. I think her name was Tracy in my class, and she said, because Dylan Lee is also Central Valley president, it's a big agriculture country, and the lead was something to like in a Central Valley where pistachios, grapes, and tomatoes are grown, a different type of baseball crop is born in Dillon Lee. And I was like, wow. And so that's one of the first things that I went up to tell him was like, hey, man, like you and I have two things in common. Went to Fresno State and I told him that. He was like, oh, that's really cool. That feels so long ago. Like it's so crazy that you guys were writing about me while I was kind of some nobody on the team. But I mean, the way he's able to transcend and help out the team has been great. I think he was definitely my point of like, getting to know at the beginning. And I think right away with the Fresno State connection, it helped right away. And me and him kind of had a similar path. Like he grew up in the primarily Hispanic community. So did I. He went to community college. So did I. We both went to Fresno State. So there's a lot, we both like fishing too. We talk about fishing quite a bit. So, but it's just stuff like that that continues to, you talk to different players, because these players pay attention to the way you interact. If you're just somebody who just stands there and does nothing, they'll notice that. But you're somebody who goes around and talks to people and, makes use of your time, they'll see that and they'll respect that and they'll know that you're worth their time to talk to. So, he's been definitely a huge help on that, and a lot of other guys. That's I think one thing I'm very fortunate about is the Braves have such a great organization when it comes to finding players, but finding players with the right personality that fit into the clubhouse. Like Mauricio Dubon has told me multiple times, like there are no pricks on the team, and I 100% agree. Like I've been in clubhouses where the moment you walk in, you feel the tension through the roof. You don't feel that way with the Braves, even when they were losing. Like you don't feel that way.
Yeah, we don't get ahead of ourselves, but we're going to get into the trade deadline, and that's huge for Alex's clubhouse culture. He said he learned it in Toronto when he brought David Price in. It was a big deal that David meshed really well. So we'll get into that. Anything else, Aaron, before we get into the Braves in general for Jesus?
No, we can go
Okay.
ahead and get into that.
Well, let's dive into it. The Braves are having a tremendous season. They're 60-42. 4.5 games up, five on the loss column of the Phillies, and they got the third best record in baseball. Jesus, just in general, in terms, you've seen some of the teams played. You talked to other writers. I'm sure you talked to the Katie and Fabian out there for the Dodgers, and they're high as a kite. They really think they got a good team. We do too. What do you think in general? How do you think the Braves are fitting into the 2026 MLB season?
Well, I think there was such a big surprise at the beginning of the season, obviously. I think there were, it's funny, we talk about starting pitching and how it's always been a question for the Braves, even heading into the season. But once the season started getting rolling along, you began to see those questions go away and everything was just firing on all cylinders. And I was fortunate enough that when I came and joined the team in Los Angeles, they were still on a pretty good, successful run for about a year, but not about a year, for about a month after that. So I was able to see, the nuts and bolts and pieces that went into creating a really good clubhouse. And then, I always told people that the hardest part about covering this team was going to be when they began slumping. And I did not expect them to slump as hard as they did in all of June. But they did, and I think you really were able to see how these guys went about business. I think I knew there was a couple things I wrote about in the Athletic where I felt like the sense of urgency wasn't there as much. Towards the end of it, especially now things are turning around, but like the attitude has always remained the same. I think the benefits of this club is that it's an older club. I feel like the game tries to go a lot younger and build around young players all the time, but this is I would say, predominantly older club with guys who have been on the team for a while. Your Rileys, your Olsons, your Acuñas, your Albies, this core group that has been together for close to 4 or 5 years at this point, right? And then you have young guys coming up. Like Didier Fuentes, like J.R. Ritchie, who's been up and down the system, and now we see Jim Jarvis coming into play, and I think a lot of those guys are relying on the veteran guys to kind of help them through this position. And I've been in different clubhouses where it's primarily young, and you can make it feels like a frat house rather than an actual Major League Baseball team. Here, it feels like it's all business all the time. Guys know when to have fun. Guys know when it's time to take care of business, and I think the benefits of having a manager like Walt Weiss in his first year is him knowing the personnel, but also having trusted them to do their own thing. He doesn't have to babysit them. He doesn't have to worry about anybody on the team doing something stupid, staying out late tonight or anything like that. Like he has full trust in them to be able to do it, and I think it comes in play hand in hand. I think in talking to a lot of different players on the team, they see Weiss as the perfect fit for a club like this. I think the other thing too is understanding for the Braves. Like I think it's one of the few organizations where you have to have a manager who understands the club, who understands the history. And I think Walt is a perfect candidate. Snit was that for a very long time because just he had been with the organization forever. And I think you're just seeing a mixture of everything coming together now. And obviously, no team is perfect. If a team was perfect in the history of baseball, we would have a team that went 162-0. That's not going to be the case with it. And I think we're seeing at this point in time where they clearly see what they need to do in order to get better, and that begins with the starting rotation. As you know, coach, like once your starting pitching starts to go down, it feels like the rest of your team kind of feeds off of that. So if they're able to get one or two starters at the trade deadline and maybe add a couple bats here and there, And I think at this point also maybe adding the bullpen, as we've seen as of late. I think they're going to be back on track to where they once were. And I think most importantly, it's getting Ronald Acuna back in the lineup. Kind of what it is.
Yeah, and getting Suarez on the bullpen back. There's the two biggest cogs coming back. I will say this before I let Erin ask her question. Evan Grant, who we just got the Rangers coming to, Evan's a great rider for Texas. He said, you know how good the Braves are. Every team's going to have a bad stretch, about 15 to 18 game stretch. The Braves were 4-14 in that stretch in June. That's about as bad as you can possibly be. Out of that, they're now 56-28 in the other games, and he thinks they have the willpower and the manpower to beat the Dodgers if they had a starting pitcher, and I agree with him. Aaron,
I
what
agree
you
with
got for Jesus? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you talked about Jim Jarvis and you said that you put an article about him today. Jim Jarvis and Brewer Hickland seem to have brought like a sort of new blood to the clubhouse. So I'm really interested to see what your thoughts are on what's going to happen to them, like when Ronald Acuna come back, when Murphy comes back, when Ha-Seong comes back, especially. Like, where do you see them going with this roster?
Yeah, and that story that I wrote talked about Eli White, Brewer Hickland, Jorge Mateo, and Dominic Smith. I think those are all guys whose roster spot could be in jeopardy once these two players come back. I think with the case is you just, DFA Joey Bart. I think that's kind of what it is. I mean, they really do like Joey Bart, so is there a world where they could potentially have three catchers? Maybe. But on this roster right now, I don't see that happening just because I think ideally for me, from what I've seen, you want to get Drake Baldwin to play behind the plate, right? But I think if you have Baldwin at DH, whatever you want to do with him when Acuna comes back, and have Murphy behind the plate, I think the defensive game, which I think has been an area of weakness for the Braves, in terms of ABS challenges and also just defensive in general. Sean Murphy is a very good defensive catcher, and I think if his bat wakes up, I think he's also a very good player. I got to see him come up through Oakland's system, so on the catcher standpoint, I think that's what could happen. But I think the other players, I think it's something that I was thinking about a lot, and that's in turning right these stories. I'm like, if I'm thinking about this, I think fans are probably thinking about this too. So it's going to be really interesting. Like, I think there's a different sides to the coin. I mean, let's start to dissect the outfielders. When Acuna comes back, an outfielder's going to need to, you know, go down or, not go down. I mean, White doesn't have any options, and neither does Brewer Hickland. And I think right now you're seeing a tough decision that's going to be happening right now. Personally, what I find so valuable about Eli White is his speed. I think if Eli White wasn't the fourth fastest man in baseball, I don't think this would be a conversation. But premium speed like that is hard to come by. He's a player that does a really good job against the left-handed hitters. Has contributed here and there. It's not going to be a guy that's going to hit a lot of, for power and stuff like that. But like, he is he's really big threat on the base paths, and also defensively too. And I think when you start to getting games into October where you're playing your guys every day, I see him along with Jorge Mateo as guys you want to keep at the end of the day. To come in pinch run situations, defensive replacement, because that speed is just such a difference maker. Although I will say, like, the Braves don't steal a lot of bases, which is interesting when you have those two guys. Granted, they don't play every single day, but like even when they're on the bases, like I don't see them make that impact. But at the same time, then Brewer Hickman comes up, and I think that shows the trust that the Braves have in him is that when Yaz came back, instead of sending down one of the outfielders, they released Kyle Farmer, who, yeah, Kyle Farmer wasn't playing quite a lot, but he was such a big clubhouse presence. Everybody loved that guy. And even when I asked Walt Weiss about how tough was it to get rid of Kyle Farmer, he was just like, it was a really hard decision. He's good standing. Maybe one day he comes back and becomes a coach one day because he's that type of guy. But I think that really was an indicator of what the club thought about Brewer Hickland. And Brewer Hickland is a reverse splits guy. He does so well against right-handed hitting, which is why he's been seeing the bulk of the playing time. And split between him and Eli White over these past couple of weeks. And he's a really good defensive player, has solid speed, makes good contact against right-handed hitting. And I think at the end of the day, for the Braves, it's just going to come down to what they want to do. White's been here for a couple of years. Do you play the hot hand and lose that premium speed? Because White's going to get picked up by a team. Nobody's going to, if he gets DFA'd, somebody's going to claim him, whether it's a playoff contending team or a team that has no chance in it. He's going to get picked up and go. So I think it comes down to it, assessing that stretch too. And I think in terms of moving over to the shortstop side, I think there's a variety of things they could do. I think one thing that I failed to address in the story after doing my Friday morning quarterback assessment of it is there's also the possibility that if they just feel like, Hassan, that Jim Jarvis and Jorge Mateo bring more value at the team, we might not ever see, Hassan Kim make his way back up, and that's what the organization seems to do. But I think with the way Jarvis is playing right now, it's kind of hard not to have him on the team. I think the only one thing that makes him really expendable is he has options. He gets option again. He has three more options. But do you really want to send him down just to give Kim maybe a chance or two to be able to do it, and that comes into the other question. Jorge Mateo, I get it. Jorge hasn't been as hot as he's been, at the beginning of the season when he was, like I wrote about, would look like he could be starting shortstop over Hassan Kim. It slowed down quite a bit. But I think he's such an instrumental guy for his versatility. You could play him at third, you could play him at short, you could play him in the outfield as the Braves did one time a few weeks ago. And he's also really, really fast. And I'm a big fan of guys who run the ball really, really fast because it just gives you so much opportunity as a bench piece late in the games, as we talked about, not just during the regular season, but down the road that maybe somebody like, I think Jarvis definitely fits that mold too. Um, but it's just going to be really interesting to see what they do. I don't want to put an opinion out there quite yet because it's something that I go back and forth quite a lot. But it's the Braves are going to be in a tough position to be able to get maybe rid of guys who are, have been contributors to the team all year, are good clubhouse guys, and might need to do what's best for them in the position to succeed. And I think I put Dom Smith there because he was slumping a little bit. But I think, as I wrote in that story last night, I think after his performance yesterday, might have not saved himself, but kind of reminded the Braves as to why it makes him so valuable. So it's gonna be really tough. I don't know what you guys would do. Definitely love to hear your guys' opinion, but like, yeah, it's a really tough situation to be in.
I think Don Smith clouded the situation for Alex yesterday. We talked about it on the our trade deadline podcast. I think Alex is going to be slow. I've been reminding all of our fans. I don't think the call ups are going to go fast. Hassan Kim doesn't have to come back up to August 1st. I think he's going to try to use the trade deadline to his favor here. I would not be surprised if Eli White or Hassan Kim get traded in some sort of small deal to get some prospects back. We'll see. Alex has got to thread a needle here, and it's very difficult because I told you yesterday, I texted him yesterday. I got to ask the question Suarez is coming back. Is there a case that we can find somebody to take Kenley off our hands and get a lower A prospect for our system? Because as a former pitching coach, I can tell you once your slider, you can't land your slider or your off speed pitch, it's hard to get it back in the horse, the old saying would be. So Tyler seems like a great guy. I've met him a couple of times, and I know he's working his tail off. But again, it showed up again yesterday where he can't land his pitch. And with Suarez coming back, he looks like the guy because I think Medeiros adds something with his 100-mile-an-hour pitch and his
Yeah.
cutter. I think Kenley might be the guy they may have to move on from. What do you think, Jesus?
I think it's if the bullpen remains as it says. I mean, we also have to remember, like let's say this decision happened like today, like Robert Suarez would come back. I think Eleazar Hernandez is the guy that goes
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
We forget about because he's been on the team almost a week and he hasn't pitched. But I think he'd be the guy that go down. But I think in talking about your specific scenario, right? Because roster moves are going to happen all the time. Like at this point, like it's going to be interesting just because if you're I mean, when like you mentioned, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but when you're a reliever, there's zero room for error. There's zero room for walks. The starters have that liberty to be able to do that because they know they're going to come back for 5 or 6 innings, right? But when you're a reliever, you just can't have stuff like that happen. I mean, look at what happened in the game yesterday. I'm thinking, that it turned into a 6-3 game to a 6-5 game, and all of a sudden, Walt has to, be a little bit more aggressive with his bullpen and stuff like that. And we kind of saw that with Medeiros too. I mean, when Medeiros wasn't able to get the job done on Wednesday night, he had to bring in Iggy and pitch him back-to-back days, and that probably means he's not going to be available tonight. So I mean, there's just a lot of ripple effects that happen when your lower leverage guys aren't performing that the way they should be. And I think as we saw earlier in the year with Aaron Bummer, right? I know that's been felt like it's been so long, but they straight up released him and they owed him a lot of money left on that contract. I think if it comes down to the point where They bring down, if Suarez comes back, of course they could try to trade Kinley and stuff like that. But I think it's likely that out of everybody in the bullpen right now, that isn't somebody that's going up and back and forth between it. I think, or just been the main cast of the bullpen all year. I think it's him, and that's really unfortunate to say because he's a good dude that really works hard and stuff like that. Probably has also the best walk-up song among all the other
Oh
pitchers.
yeah, yeah.
you know, but it's a really tough scenario for him. That's the one thing that I'm finding a little bit tougher about you know evaluating this the part of this job's like evaluating who might be gone and stuff like that because you see these guys every day, you build a relationship with them, and then one day they're not there anymore, which is kind of tough. So I'm curious to see what that is, but I think, I mean, like we mentioned, if Kinley can't figure it out with the breaking pitches, I think he might be next guy out.
And we mentioned on the trade podcast, I'll let Aaron in here real quick, but we mentioned that Joey Bart's situation is interesting because Joey Bart would bring you a prospect back. I don't think they're going to DFA him. I think he may get traded because our fellow Dodger, they just put Will Smith on the 60-day IL. So they're going to
Yeah.
be looking for a catcher, and Joey Bart hits the honey hole there. You might as well get a prospect back
Yeah.
instead of just DFAing him. I hate that for Joey. He's a former Georgia Tech guy, so there's a lot of love for me and him. So, but I think he's going to probably be playing for somebody else. Aaron?
Mhm.
Yeah, while we're talking about pitching and trade deadline needs, so obviously starting pitching is like the biggest thing for the Braves right now, and it I think should be the priority. A lot of people argue that we need two starters. CJ made a good point on the broadcast yesterday. He said we don't need two starters, we just need one quality starter, and then we can bolster the bullpen. And he referenced the Dodgers, how they won the World Series basically with their bullpen. And I tend to agree with him, but do you, or what do you think the strategy should be when it comes to pitching and deadline acquisitions?
I think that's a good philosophy in October. I truly do because when it comes to October, you don't you're firing on all cylinders. You're putting your best guys out there, no matter how much rest and stuff like that is. Like a pitcher could go 3 innings, and you're not going to bring them for the fourth or fifth because these are win now situations. But it's July. We have to get to October before, and as we've seen, look at that lead has been lost and stuff like that. Like it went from double digit to maybe 2 or 3 games at the very moment, right? So I do think two starting pitchers are really important. Does that mean that they both have to be really, really good? Ideally that's what you want. But I was looking at it. My guy before was Sonny Gray before the
Yeah.
before obviously the Red Sox went on to do what they went on to do and stuff like that, right? But I still think guys like Joe Ryan, Reed Detmers, Robbie Ray, Casey Mize are all, I think, pitchers who could come to the organization. And, these aren't guys like your Tarek Skubal, right? And Sonny Gray isn't even on that Tarek Skubal level. But I think these are guys who give you consistent quality outings every single time they go out there, pitch 5 or 6 innings and, give your bullpen a little bit more rest as opposed to what we've been seeing from Grant Holmes, from Bryce Elder, from Martin Perez at some point too. So I think that the case for that needs to be at least two starting pitchers. And I'm a guy who like, especially after covering prospects, like I'm a sell the farm guy, right? Like you're always going to find guys to be able to replenish that farm, especially with how well the Braves drafted this upcoming year. I don't think there's an untouchable prospect within that system right now. I think maybe the only untouchable player right now that would fit within that mold is Didier Fuentes. Even though he's not a prospect, he's still a young guy. I think he's the only untouchable guy because he has a very important role right now with the major league team and could be a starter down the road. That's a conversation for another day. But I do think that the need for it is really important, and I think they could do it two ways, right? They could go with rentals who maybe aren't going to cost as much, but I also like the idea of maybe potentially getting people who are going to be under control for a few years to be able to have them. If you have to give up more prospect capital, that's fine because you get these guys for 2 years, and then the what's it called? You're covered for the next season or two, right? So I think that's something that they need to be able to do because, like, I mean, you look at that Dodgers run, and I think that's a really good point to bring up. They had a really good start. They had a really good lineup, but I think their pitching is what won them the whole thing, and that's what's won them for the past years and stuff like that. You can throw money out of the window right now, but at the end of the day, that pitching is what really, really solidified them to be in that position. So I do think that's the case, and I do think, and I think A mentioned this too, like adding another reliever. I think would also be nice. I was on the train that maybe Aroldis Chapman should join the Braves, and then the Red Sox also again. So the Red Sox are kind of killing a lot of my trade scenarios. But you don't need to add a guy who's going to be a Robert Suarez, Iggy type of level. You just add another guy who is going to be a much bigger upgrade than some of the guys they have in the bullpen right now. Some guys that you can come in, come October, bridge the gap. And the other thing too is like if the Braves were to get starting rotation, they also have a couple other questions when it comes to the starting pitching. In a sense, like let's say they add two pitchers, I think Sale, those two pitchers, and Elder are going to be there. What's going to happen to that fifth spot, right? You're going to have to think about what's going to happen to Grant Holmes and what's going to happen to Martin Perez, specifically those two guys, right? And I think those two guys are good options to go into the bullpen because, I mean, they have pitched in that position before. Martin Perez at the beginning of the season was going back and forth between it. And like I said, come the playoffs, if you have a starter that only goes 3 innings, boom, welcome Grant Holmes, welcome Martin Perez, a left-hander and a right-hander that can be able to go 2 innings for you, and you don't have to unload your bullpen every night. That's kind of stuff that comes into play. So it just seems like when there's one trickle effect happening, a lot of others are coming into play too.
Yeah, we think Grant Holmes could be a lights out in the postseason out of that bullpen because he can
Yeah.
come in and really shut you down in the middle innings. Real quickly on the CJ's comment, we brought it up on the trade deadline podcast. I pushed back against CJ, and I love CJ, but in 24, yeah, they did it with the bullpen, but in 25, they won it with their starting pitching because they had no bullpen. And their
Yep.
starters had to go down and pitch. So I don't care. I'm with Jesus. However you go, you got to get through the season and hold off the Phillies. And I think it's a starting pitcher.
Mm,
I'm a big Reed Detmers fan. He's
me too.
controllable.
Mm.
We were told they had 11 team scouts at his last game. He pitched unbelievable. He had one bad pitch to J.J. Weatherholt, who hit the ball out of the ballpark, and they lost the game 1-0. So we also like Michael Waka, and of course, Aaron loves Joe Ryan. So
Yeah,
I'm with
Joe
you. I
Ryan's
think,
my guy.
yeah, I'm with multiple guys. As far as the bat, the guy that I circled, it's some connections I have with the Reds that I think is going to be available. I think he'd be a perfect fit here. Is Spencer Steer. So if you had to look around in a bat, because I think we will try to add, at least look, we may not get a deal done, but I think we may try to look for a bat. What's a bat out there? Mine's Spencer Steer. Do you have somebody you like to see the Braves maybe get to bring into the situation?
I think Cody Clemens from the Tigers would be a really good actor
It's a good
to
one.
be able to do. I think he's having a career year right now. I think more than anything, the Braves are going to be able to get a right-handed bat into that lineup. Um, this kind of sounds corny just because he's also a Fresno State guy, but Taylor Ward I think would also be good. Sure, the power and the pop isn't as there, but he is getting on base at probably the best clip of his career right now. I think when if we asked about the lineup maybe like a month when I first got onto the team, I was like, yeah, you don't need anybody else. You just need a healthy team. I mean, Dom's doing his thing, Yaz is doing his thing. Doobie's doing his thing because at the time he was a true utility guy wherever he could fit and stuff like that. But I think you need that extra dump, especially because right now on the left side of the infield, there really isn't as much production as you'd like to see. I think I think if the left side of the infield was as productive as it should be, as it was expected to, I think this team would still be in a double digit lead, but that's not the case. I think it's encouraging to see Austin Riley, swing the bat a little bit better heading into the second half and stuff like that. Jarvis has really sparked that. I think he's the ideal 9 hole hitter for them right now. Just a guy that can turn over the lineup, runs really fast, and plays premium defense. But to go back to your point about the trade deadline, like I think a right-handed bat's going to be really crucial for them. I think they're on the left-handed side, like they are pretty set on it and stuff like that. But especially for guys to come off the bench, in specific matchups, I'm thinking more towards October, right? Because you can do whatever during the regular season. There's so much flexibility, but when every at bat matters, you have to have a guy who's going to be a difference maker, with the pitches that he sees.
Because he does what Dubon, he can play any position. So
Mhm.
whoever gets code, he can move. Aaron, you got anything else as far as the trade deadline?
No, as far as right-handed batters, I haven't been looking into that too much because I'm all about the starting pitching with my current trade stuff that I'm working on. But I mean, I know that a lot of people don't really like this idea, but just a reunion with Jorge Soler. He's on a semi-friendly deal. He's not terribly expensive. He's been on the team before. He was in the MVP of the World Series. I'm not saying that history is going to repeat itself, but if we're looking for a right-handed bat, I feel like that would be a decent option to at least look into.
Yes, there's somebody should be me. I'm not for Jorge Soler coming there, Jesus. All right, real quick, Walt Weiss. You didn't get to know Brian. We usually always ask the Brian question, but you're a brand new writer, so you maybe have talked to Brian as he come through his retirement, whatever. But not. What is it like working for Walt Weiss? Is it when you ask a question? Because I know this that when I was coaching, I had writers sometimes tell me that they were nervous to come ask me something because they thought I was so intense, and I had other writers say I was so open because I would just open up and tell them honestly. Walt Weiss, what does he like to interview?
Well, he's a guy that does his research because he knew who I was the first day I met him and my work and stuff like that. So he's clearly a guy that I think does read all of our stuff. Just because I think, he's old school. I mean, that's back in the day when newspapers and stuff like that were very dependent on it. So I think that's kind of how he receives a lot of his news and stuff like that. But I think for him, like it's been such a great. I've been around some managers, who are very tough to ask. Fortunately, when I was in Arizona, Torey Lovella was a great guy. Mark Kotze was a great guy to talk, but then you have a couple other managers who are just, pretty stern and, are guys that you're afraid to kind of approach. But Walt has not been the case. He's been so open, talks to us, especially on the road. At home, there's a little bit more movements going on and stuff like that. But on the road, like sometimes we'll sit in the dugout for like an hour and just talk. Sometimes it's just baseball stuff. I like to ask him a lot of scout-based questions because I'm always trying to elevate my game when it comes to evaluating players and kind of watching the mechanics of it because I didn't play baseball growing up. In my community, there was no baseball, right? So, but baseball was always a sport that I liked. That was kind of like the outlier when it came to that. So, being able to understand about mechanics, pitching, defense, I think elevates my game a little bit because I'm able to assess what's going on and ask specific questions of players and coaches that are able to kind of help my writing and reporting a little bit more. But other than that, like it's good. Like I went up to him, during batting practice at the Turtle and just asked him, hey, like how back in the day before they had all these metrics about, exit velocity, bat speed, and stuff like that, how would you evaluate what a good player is down in the minor leagues? And we had a good conversation about it's all about the eye test. And I think, we talk about scouting and all that stuff too. So it's been so great. It's been so great being able to work with him. He's very transparent. We all have a really good relationship with him, me, Bo, and Chad, which I'm very blessed to have a good group of beat reporters. And I think the Braves country is too with those two guys too. But just in regards to Walt, like it's been really great. Like it's nice being able to come up to him. If I have to ask questions separately, he'll do it. Like it's been great.
Good deal. And I'm friends with Chad. I met him at Georgia Tech, and said Chad's a great guy, and I know he said the same thing about Walt. So we know Walt's that kind of guy. Aaron, you got anything else?
Yeah, I know that you talked about who was it, Didier Fuentes, that you had a lot of conversations with. Um, and then Kyle Farmer also being like a huge clubhouse presence. That was something that I didn't necessarily realize. So I wanted to ask you, if is there another player that maybe their personality would surprise fans if they actually knew like a little more about them outside of the field?
Well, I'll answer two sides to that question. I think one guy who is like the glue to that clubhouse is Mauricio Dubon. I mean, he speaks both English and Spanish. It's a little crazy sometimes, a little too much, but me and him have a really good relationship. So I'm entitled to be able to say those things about him. He's just a guy who like he talks to everybody, understands like has the also like coming over from another country perspective, but also playing up and having all this pro ball being drafted and stuff like that. I think a few other guys that you'd be surprised. Chris Sale. I think a lot of people see Chris Sale as this intimidating figure, which I did when I first got to the clubhouse too, because like I told him like I watched him growing up. Like I heard the Jersey story where he shredded it up and stuff like that. How intense he is, and you get there and he's such a laid back guy that just likes to talk, likes to relax, likes to talk pitching, likes to talk about anything. I mean, there's been times like me and him and the beat, like we're on the road because that's where like you're able to interact a lot with them the most. Like we talk about whatever, we talk about his family, we talk about his kids, like we told us a story about like how his son started playing baseball and he needed a first base glove and he didn't want to ask this guy for a glove, but they didn't have one and they were in a bind, and he asked Matt Olson for his glove, and now his kid is playing with a Matt Olson Gold Glove. I think has a little patch on it glove, playing JV baseball or whatever. So I think him, uh, Iggy, Raisel Iglesias, has a big presence, I think, in there too with the Latin guys more than anything in the way he interacts. You wouldn't expect it because he's a very quiet guy, but I think he takes to that niche very well. And I'm trying to find like a third guy that truly does it. I think Jorge Mateo. Jorge Mateo too. He's been a guy at this point who's played with a lot of the guys who are on the Braves. Played with Olsen during their time coming up with the A's and Murphy too, and also speaks English pretty well now too. So he's able to kind of do that too. But those are guys that I think interact very very well. Brewer Hickman's very social. He's a social butterfly. Loves talking. But I mean, when you talk about, I think key clubhouse figures, I think Kyle Farmer was as key as it became. I think that's what they were able to keep him for so long as a team, and they just ran out of time with him.
I think Kyle's going to come back and be a coach in the Braves system. He's a Georgia guy, and I think he'll come back here. So we're going to get you out. We always talk about our guy, Bo. He's been with the Braves. It's hard to be on the beat 25 years, any team, even high school, local high school. So, what's been like working with Bo? I know he's a big cut up and everything, but has he helped? I know we always ask the first question. You always let him have the first question. And but what's it like working with somebody that's been around the team in general just 25 years? So he knows the ticket taker, he knows the security guys because he's seen them. So what's it like working with Bo?
Very admirable. And during my time at MLB.com, I never got to fill in for him. He always came into Arizona, so I never got to fill in for him. I never got to edit his newsletter, so I actually never worked with Bo. I met him last year at the All Star at the Futures game, and I met him for the first time. And I think it's really impressive the way he goes about his business and now also how humble he is. Like Bo's such a good guy. Like I call him OG. He's gained that nickname from me, just because of the way he carries himself, how long he's been around, and how right he treats everybody. And I think this mentality of like seeing your other reporters as competition has kind of slowly died ever since I began in the business. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, you could hear these horror stories about everybody, sabotaging everybody to be able to get these stories, especially, when print media was how you found out whether or not you got outscooped for a story or not, right? Now it's so different. Like I get along not just with Bubba, but with Chad really, really well. And I think I'm very fortunate to be able to do that because I've been around a lot of beats that aren't too pleasant. I hear stories, back and forth from other colleagues about it. There's certain. I'm not going to name the team or anything like that because I'm not going to air dirty laundry. But there's a beat that don't sit with each other at all
Oh, I
because they
know.
all hate each other. So it's kind of when you get to the ballpark, we talk Braves and stuff like that too. But we'll also talk, family. We'll talk about, stuff going on. I like to remind Chad about how bad Fresno State beat Georgia Southern last year. I like to remind Bo how old he is and stuff like that. Like it feels like a brotherhood with them too. And I'm very fortunate to have those guys with me and learn from both of them too, because at the end of the day, I know it's Chad's first year on the beat, but he's had a career, that dates back to when he was covering Western Kentucky and doing different circuits and stuff like that. And Bo obviously having been with MLB so long, I think he's seen how the game has changed. He's seen how players, how data and all that stuff comes into play. And like I'm always listening. I'm a student of the game. Like I have a passion for storytelling. I have a passion for baseball, but I also have a passion for reporting. So I'm always listening to the way they ask questions, the way they talk to guys. Never stealing any story ideas or anything like that because that's just messed up, right? But like I'm just always paying attention to see what they do to be able to do that, and there's sometimes stuff in their writing, where I'm just like, wow, that is really good. And also shout out to Gabe Burns too. Gabe also
Gabe's
comes out
good.
every once in a while. I know he covered for the beat for a bit, and me and him got on along really well. And I think, like his Jim Jarvis story that he wrote a few days ago, I think was very beautiful. The way he was able to incorporate a lot of details, and it's stuff like that that really teaches you how to become a better reporter. We're all in it together. It's I'm very fortunate. So I also appreciate you asking that question just because I love this game.
Yeah.
Especially when you're far away from home. My family's all in California. You see these guys every day. Having that good relationship means a lot to me because I'm all alone here. So to have a good group of guys that I can see every day and look forward to at the ballpark is really special.
It is, and then to his point, anybody that knows me around the stadium knows I'm right near the elevators where the media goes up and down. Hey, sis, you're telling it right. I've seen them not get on the elevator with each other. They don't like each other so much, and I know one of those ball clubs is in our one of our National League rivals, and it's funny to watch them come around the curb and they see one of them on the elevator. They almost wait for her to come back up. So, Aaron, you got anything else before we get him out of here?
No, I think that's everything. I enjoy your articles. I've covered a couple of them in my content. I love the angle that you take and the insider feel that they have, and that it isn't just, a game recap. It's great stuff, and it's been great to have you on today and get a bunch of insight on the team.
Yeah, we're really happy that you come on. Hey, sis, you got anything you want to plug? Tell them where to find you and what you got coming up. I love the article. I started reading a little bit. Me and him had to jump into this one, so I'm going to go back and finish it. But I was looking forward to seeing who you thought might be on the roster. But where can we find you?
Yeah, so my Twitter is underscore Jesus Cano 88. My name's not pronounced like Robinson Cano. It's Cano. There's no accent over though. I should have probably said that before the show. Don't worry about it. It's all
Mhm.
good. And then I do have a media Instagram that I'm trying to use, but there's just so much moving factors into it. But it's at by Jesus Cano. That's where I post a lot of Instagram stuff, a lot of like my road, stuff that you can see on the road and stuff like that. I need to elevate that game a little bit, but there's so many moving factors. And yeah, of course, I think the biggest favor I can ask anybody is if that they do appreciate the work. My work's over at the Athletic. We're owned by the New York Times, so with an Athletic subscription, you have the option to get access to stuff that's published in the New York Times. But it's not just we have an Atlanta Falcons beat reporter. We have a really good college team, and just national reports too from different levels of sports that cover everything. So if you subscribe to the Athletic, you're not just getting the Braves coverage; you're getting a bunch of different coverage from some really talented reporters across the country and internationally too. If you're a soccer fan too, like they do it, they killed it with the World Cup. They cover the European leagues, the international scene pretty well. So when you subscribe to the Athletic, it's more than just the Braves coverage. There's a lot more that comes into play, and that's really all I could ask for. Thank you guys so much for having me and being so welcoming to this. Like this is such a big career move, life move, but I'm starting to feel right at home here. I'll say this: I do definitely feel more at home here than I did in Phoenix at this stage of my tenure
Yeah.
here. So I appreciate everybody, and whenever you guys need me on the show, as long as I have time, I'll be here.
Well, we appreciate you, Jesus, and his Instagram account is great. So y'all jump over there. He takes some of the best pictures, especially at the ballpark. I love the pictures he gets. He has. So we're gonna get out of here. Remember, Aaron on deck, TikTok. She's gonna have all the videos for the trade deadline, and we all think there will be a trade by the end of this next week coming up because I don't think teams are going to try to make a trade in the weekend. So we may have somebody jump the gun here soon. Hey, Jesus, take care. We appreciate you. We're going to get you out of here. Love you, Braves country. And as always, peace.
You know what, boys? You guys are going to be world champions for the rest of your life.